Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Worth Your Time, Worth Your Money, an ongoing segment I do here on this channel where I just have a look at the opening hours of new and upcoming games. Well, newish I suppose. Silent Hill F is what's on the menu today, and Steam tells me right now that it was released on the 25th of December, so I'm a couple of months late, or a month or two behind, but hey, we're having a look at it today. It's developed by Neobards Entertainment. Look, I had a look. I don't really know anything about them. They did a skin pack for Resident Evil, so that's interesting. I guess they're moving in that circle because the Resident Evil versus Silent Hill conversation is unavoidable and it will probably come up here. But anyway, they're doing this and they're doing it under Konami, who are obviously the Silent Hill guys. There's been a bit of a Silent Hill resurgence, which is good. It's really clever on the back of the Resident Evil resurgence, a sort of modern soft rebooting that kicked off with 7, but also re-releasing the old games, but from a new perspective in tandem. So it sort of alternates between this remake and ongoing series. It's very clever and it's put Resident Evil really in the spotlight. So I'm glad to see Silent Hill keeping pace. I'm not necessarily saying it's cause and effect, but like I said, the two have been dueling just like console wars and that as the survival horror rivals of time immemorial. So Konami went out and seemed to have greenlit a whole bunch of Silent Hill projects. Some have already come out, like the Silent Hill 2 remake, and then obviously Silent Hill F, a little bit of a side project. The one I'm really hanging out for is called, or at least its working title is Silent Hill Townfall, I think. Being developed by No Code, or I guess they rebranded to Screen Burn or something like that. Anyway, look up at Observation. Not Observer, Observation, one of my favorite games ever, and I'm just curious to see what they do with the Silent Hill franchise. So as you can tell, there's a little bit of history. I know a bit about it, and we find ourselves at Silent Hill F, which is a kind of spin-off, I guess. It's very early hours for me, so it's hard to tell specifically where it's going, but you can obviously see the Japanese aesthetic, setting, theme, what have you, in a series that is ultimately very much Western based. It's always based around Silent Hill, concept of. They go abroad a little bit, but I don't know if it's ever really left America, actually, now that I think about it. Anyway, so that's a little bit of, History 101, bit of background, bit of pedigree, and so far, despite the change in setting, it's still carrying a lot of the themes under the hood. What makes a Silent Hill game a Silent Hill game? It's eerie, it's creepy. However, it does have a little bit of that action kick, which I would argue is part of this new wave, new generation of survival horror that is in turn making them much more accessible from a mainstream audience position. And again, to use the Resident Evil examples, Resident Evil 4 is heralded as one of the greatest Resident Evils of all time, and I don't mean to be sort of a prudish, I listened to indie music before it was cool kind of guy, but I have a real soft spot for the original fixed camera angles Resident Evil games. They were my jam. That was always my thing. Resident Evil 4 kind of turned it into a more of a mainstream bait action game, which has done wonders for the series and its profile. So I'm not complaining or anything like that. I'm just a little bit more biased to OG. The reason for mentioning that is, while that was a sort of iteration that pushed its profile, so too have been some of the modern remake iterations as well, the 2s and the 3s over the shoulder. And the reason I spend so much time ruminating on Resident Evil is because it's very clear that the Silent Hill series is following, not in lockstep, but very closely, with Silent Hill 2 Remake being the same sort of concept. More action combat heavy, this third person shooter type game in the Silent Hill setting. And from what I can understand, the Silent Hill 2 remake was really well widely received. Anyway, the reason for all of that setup is to say that this game, Silent Hill F, is taking that more of an action combat, dare I say empowered twist that both those series have been doing as part of their modern serve for a newer audience, I guess. And time will tell to see if it's a good move for Silent Hill. Between the two series, of which I'm much bigger a fan of Resident Evil, it's a lot more grounded. It's viruses and backstory and explaining everything, whereas the Silent Hill series is much more psychological, philosophical even. It doesn't explain everything away, which I think is to its strength, but it plays in the blurry space, right? Leaving questions unanswered, keeping it more sort of mystical and mystified. And one of the strengths, you could say, which kind of scared me off even as a young gamer, like I played Silent Hill for the room or whatever, and I found that absolutely terrifying. But, you know, you have ghost enemies, invincible enemies, problems that can't just be solved with brute force often. And that's been a bit of a cornerstone of the Silent Hill series, is being abjectly terrifying and scary because of your relatively powerless position, as opposed to, again, Resident Evil, where it's about counting ammo and shooting zombies in the head. A lot of answers to the questions, whereas Silent Hill is more existential horror. And as much as I'm enjoying this game, arguably I'm enjoying this more than most Silent Hills, it's probably because it's drifting towards a more empowered Resident Evil type model. I can't really give too much story away because there's not much to give away. It's still holding on to that, not really giving you the full answers, but you're playing as this Hinako schoolgirl right in her hometown. There's a fog, a mist, there's a small cast of characters, her school friends by the look of it. She's obviously having some issues at home, maybe some bully stuff at school. I don't know, they brushed over it, but she might even be knocked up from the boyfriend sort of love interest. Again, it plays it vague, which is to its strength. But before long, I'm running along, and the soundtrack and the music and the cinematic blocking, actually, that has to be really discussed, actually. A lot of games champion themselves as cinematic games, you know, the ones that win Game of the Year award, and there's all this in-group bullshit, which I don't really like. Often they're a lot closer to a walking sim than a game, and I can't believe that they get awards and not actual games, but I digress further. Often I find, as someone I'm a bit of a cinephile, I quite enjoy my movies. Cinematic games aren't actually that cinematic usually. They don't understand the concept of cinematic blocking and framing and camera work. The God of War remake, a great example, and you know, I know you're not allowed to say bad things about it, everyone loves it so much, but that sort of champions that it's this one-shot camera shot thing. Maybe you didn't know about that, maybe you won't be able to unsee it. It's a cool gimmick, but it's not what I would call cinematic. There are some very limited one-off scenarios where filmmakers have done like a one-shot as part of their package, and limited further still are the ones where they try and one-shot a whole movie. But just using that as an example, you know, the things that we celebrate in cinematic gaming often are not terribly cinematic in themselves. Consider all the Mass Effects and these RPGs, even your Baldur's Gates. It's just like a jammed up camera angle shoving a character's face in your face so you can have dialogue trees. There's not a cinematic thing about any of it. Anyway, the reason I mention it is because it's almost jarringly obvious that they've made an effort to do cinematic blocking and all these cutscenes, right? And dare I say, it's probably the most cinematic game I've played this year because it's following the said principles of blocking. Anyway, before I got onto that sidetrack, but I did want to make sure I wanted to point it out, the game hasn't really taken very long to give me like a dodge mechanic, a counter mechanic. It gave me a metal pole, which is kind of a staple of a lot of Silent Hill games. You're just a nobody picking up whatever improvised weapon you can get. I mean, I've got like a little sword. Anyway, I don't want to give away what's happened so far, but I'm talking conceptually. They've given me action, timing, dodge, counter mechanics with light, heavy attacks, and I'm just beating the shit out of anything that I come across, basically. There's these sort of mannequin dolls with the Grudge ring hair, very much just a almost fetishized, easternized version of the nurses from Silent Hill. But whatever, you know, they're creepy, they work, but, you know, you give me a stick and you give me some rules for action combat, and I just belt anything that I come across. Now, granted, they all seem to be invincible and they come back after a while or whatever. Again, very Silent Hill. But like I said, it bears mentioning because I don't know if it's a criticism. It makes it more palatable for someone like me that comes from the Resident Evil side of the fence, the one where it's a little bit more graspable and you have a lot more control over the flow of, let's say, the action state. Whereas I would argue the strength of most Silent Hill games, experiences, worlds is this creepy, powerless, railing against ghosts with a metal stick and, you know, feeling about as helpless as you probably would in that situation, dealing in the grey. And I feel that in many ways, while thematically and cinematically this game still captures that, in the moment-to-moment action, it's empowered me so much so that I wonder if hardcore super fans of the Silent Hill series won't actually like this. To say that the combat is usually kind of bad and janky in the Silent Hill games is probably fair, but, coupling this along with the Silent Hill 2 remake, I'd have to go back. I played a few hours of that and enjoyed it, but I feel like it was probably under the same principles. That was very much channeling the same third-person, reimagining Resident Evil 4 style action combat that you see on the other side of the fence. Anyway, I don't need to waffle. I think I've impressed my point. This is really good, and here's my takeaway. If you're a hardcore Silent Hill fan, you've probably already played this already, and you have an opinion, which you're welcome to share. I wonder if I'm close to the mark with what I've said. But if you're someone more like me, right? Maybe you get a bit scared off by Silent Hill. I'm happy to admit it. Silent Hill tries to scare the shit out of you, whereas Resident Evil, I've famously said, is not really a horror game. It is an action schlock movie, almost like a Fast and the Furious movie series at this point, punching boulders and that, but it's set in a zombie virus setting. It just happens to be a horror setting, but it's not necessarily trying to terrify you. So if you found the Silent Hill games to be too much because they're too scary, and the fact that you're disempowered as part of that loop, this might actually be really worth giving it a go, if only because it's more graspable, it's more actiony. Dare I say, it might be a better on-ramp for someone that's scared away, figuratively and literally, by the Silent Hill core franchise. Anyway, I like it. It appeals to me, obviously. Curious how it sits with existing fans. Let's not go around in circles again. Might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.